Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this ILO Laboris webinar. My name is Alessia Perez, and I will be facilitating the session for you today. Today's webinar talks about productivity at work, growth, people, and protection, and will be given by a set of panelists. We have lawyers from the UK and French member firms of ILO Laboris, and two guest speakers, Annabelle Murugan from OECD and Christian Vigelan from ILO. Before we kick off the session, I would like to clarify a couple of points on the housekeeping side. If you have any question throughout the session, you can use the Q&A tab to send your questions to us, and the panelists will answer as many as they can. You can, of course, also reach out to the panelists by email after the webinar. Regarding the slides, those will be available on our website along with the recording of this webinar. I will now turn over to James Davis from Lewis Silkin, the UK member firm of ILO Laboris, to begin the session. Go ahead, James, you're welcome to start.
Thank you very much, Alessia, and welcome to everybody that's joined our webinar today. I'm very pleased to welcome our guest speakers today, Annabelle, who is Head of Trade and Productivity Statistics Division at OECD, and Christian, who is the labour economist for APAC for the ILO. Productivity in the workplace has been insipid for much of the 21st century. What we're going to do today is to look at some of the causes for that and ask the question what we might do in order to address productivity. The various speakers today are going to cover various aspects, and at the end of the session we are going to come back and deal with any questions that you might have. So please do share questions that you have, because that's one of the most interesting aspects of these webinars, is looking at what's actually of most interest to yourselves. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Annabelle, who is going to talk to us about recent labour productivity trends.
Many thanks, James, and thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you an overview of recent developments in labor productivity, drawing on our annual compendium of productivity indicators and on two recent reports we've done on measurement. And you have all the links here. Next slide, please. So let me start with what has become a well-established stylized fact, that productivity growth has been slowing down for decades. But there are a few points I would like to highlight here. First, this slowdown preceded the financial global crisis. It was not caused by it, as is sometimes suggested. And secondly, the slowdown was really broad-based. It's visible at the aggregate, the average of OECD countries that you can see here in brown. It's also visible in the US in green and in the euro area in blue. And when you look at sectors, it affected most sectors, notably manufacturing, finance, and insurance and ICT. And the one apparent exception is professional services and administration, but it's also a sector where it's very hard to measure productivity. So what's driving this? It's actually a little bit difficult to pin down definitive causes, particularly in the context of ongoing technological progress, but we can make a few observations. The first observation is when we decompose productivity growth, we usually distinguish between two components. The first component is what we call the reallocation effects. It's the shifts in hours between sectors. And the second component is the within effect, which capture what's happening within a sector, like skill intensity, capital use, or innovation capacity. It also captures exposure to competition or engagement in trade and global value chains. And so, as you can see from the chart here, the within effect, which is in blue, accounts for the majority of productivity developments. This holds for the US, as you can see here, but it's equally visible across all the OECD countries that we cover. Next slide, please. The second finding worth noting is that smaller firms consistently show lower average productivity than larger ones. This is also well known. But what is perhaps less known is that the extent of the gap varies widely across countries. The difference is relatively small in the UK, for instance, but it's substantial in Italy or several Eastern European countries. And this heterogeneity matters for policy. Next slide, thanks. So I would like to close here with a cautious but positive note, which is that recent data suggests that there is a mild recovery in productivity growth in 2024. This is visible in both the US and the euro area, but also in the OECD average. That said, we need to be a bit prudent here. Next slide, please. Indeed, the recovery is far from universal. About a third of OECD countries still experience negative growth in 2024, and in particular, this was the case in the UK and in Italy. And looking ahead, the outlook is really uncertain. On the downside, rising economic and geopolitical uncertainties, trade restrictions are going to weigh on investment. And over the medium term, you also have the effect of population aging and climate change that are likely to act as headwinds. So it's hard to really quantify their impact precisely. But on the upside, AI holds real potential here to offset some of these pressures. But how large those gains are going to be and when they are going to materialize remains an open question. Thank you. Back to you, James.
I was fascinated to see that the UK has the lowest difference between productivity in large and small businesses. That's a fact that I was not aware of. I mean, is there an explanation for that? Do people have theories?
No, it's very hard, especially in the UK. People have been working very hard to really try to understand productivity developments. Some explanation some people put forward is in terms of management skills, and in part, in fact, that management skills are not as high in the UK as they could. That what you can see in other countries. So this may lower productivity in large firms in the UK compared to other countries. But this is one explanation only. There is no clear and definitive answer, especially on the UK.
I mean, fascinating, because it's not something that's part of the political narrative in the UK, but that's very interesting. Christian, if we could perhaps move over to you to talk a little bit about APAC and recent trends and post-pandemic shifts within the region.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, James. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And thank you also to Annabelle for highlighting some of the recent productivity trends and measurement issues across OECD economies. It's really interesting as well, to see some of the similarity, but also differences to Asia Pacific. So I will indeed briefly highlight some of the trends in productivity within Asia Pacific and also discuss a little bit how very briefly how labor market structures shape some of those outcomes. I would really like to focus on three findings. So number one, so that is what you see on that slide. So this really shows you, the slide shows you growth of output per worker, labor productivity measure. I also want to highlight that, we of course also have data and estimates of labor productivity based on output per actual hours worked, but the results are actually, the overall pattern is actually really quite remarkably similar. So what we see here is two things. So on the one hand, we do see labor productivity growth in Asia Pacific generally higher than global productivity growth. So in that sense, Asia Pacific is a very dynamic region in terms of improvements in labor productivity. Of course, dependent as well, to the extent in different subregions, a little bit different. But then, the second finding that I would really like to highlight is while labor productivity in the region has continued to grow, we really see that the pace of growth has moderated over the recent years. And in Asia Pacific, we really see a little bit of a shift, for sure, during the COVID pandemic, but then also thereafter and until now. So during the COVID pandemic, labor productivity growth has slowed down quite drastically due to various factors. Companies would have kept some of their employees, even though demand was low, so they did not produce as much of goods and services that were because due to low demand. And also we have the whole informal informal employment sector, where we have, for example, fruit and vegetable seller on the street would still be in informal employment, but not sell as much. But then, very interestingly, indeed, in recent years, we do see that productivity growth seems to be lower. And then, if you could move to the second slide. So the question is, of course, why is this the case? So this was shown for the OECD in one of Annabelle's slides. So there is this reallocation effect as well as the within effect. And what we actually find for Asia Pacific, that it's actually largely the reallocation effect that is responsible for this slowdown. So what is this reallocation about? So that's about structural transformation of the economy, the shift of workers from lower to higher productivity sectors. And just exemplary, you see here the share of workers in the agricultural sector, which has, over decades actually declined. But this decline has actually stopped, or the line has become certainly flatter in recent years. And this is really one of the main factors actually why we observe this labor productivity growth, since workers are not anymore as fast moving to the more productive sectors. This has an negative impact on labor productivity growth. And then just the last finding that I would like to share, that's really about, what does that mean actually for job quality aspects. And here I show you one of our indicators, which is a proxy indicator for job quality, informal employment. So informal employment refers to working arrangements that are in practice or by law not subject to national labor legislation, income taxation, or entitlement to social protection or other employment guarantees. So that indicator is an indicator of quality of jobs, a partial indicator, and we see as well over time, this informal employment share has actually gone down, but then also in recent years, starting from COVID pandemic, especially, this slowdown, this decline has actually slowed down. So we don't really see any more so fast improvements in job quality. And I could show you actually some other indicators here as well, just to name one. So we have the indicator of working poverty. So this shows you how many workers are actually in employment, but still are not able to actually escape poverty. And there we do see some slowdown as well. And this is again linked to this slowdown in structural transformation, because it's typically and on average the lower productivity sector where we actually see on average a lower job quality. And so if less people are working out of the lower, are moving out of the lower productivity sectors, then also the improvements in job quality become slow down over time. So this is just to, let's say, illustrate you that, of course, the overall picture in terms of labor productivity growth, we see some slowdown, but this is very much related to structural transformation and also to job quality aspects, which I think is quite interesting. Back to you, James.
Thank you, Christian. So, Corinne, next slide, please. So I'm going to say a little bit about Lewis Silkin's annual Future at Work survey. This is something that we've been doing for a number of years. This year it involved us interviewing, engaging external consultants who surveyed 663 senior decision makers globally and followed up with in-depth interviews with a number of these. If you'd like a copy of this, do get in touch with us. Very happy to give you either a soft copy or I'll send you a hard copy if you prefer. The report highlighted a number of key findings, takeaways, and actions. It looked at in some detail how AI, geopolitics, and corporate values were driving change across the world of work. Perhaps the findings most relevant to productivity relate to the adoption of AI and the adoption of technology more generally within workplaces. And perhaps the most significant finding, which permeated the entire report, but particularly the parts on technology and AI, was something that we call the readiness mirage. I'm not sure if this is something that you would also agree with. It was clear from the responses to the survey that short-term thinking is holding back organisations. Whilst many expressed a high confidence in their ability to handle change, much of it came across as short-term reactivity and not long-term readiness. Planning horizons have narrowed significantly, leaving employers vulnerable to capability, leadership, and workforce gaps. Respondents to the survey consistently highlighted these capability gaps. 93% identified skills and workforce gaps. 81% highlighted governance and risk gaps, and 80% leadership and strategy gaps. These are very high numbers. We all know that AI and technology has a huge potential to increase productivity, and this was echoed by the results of the survey. 56% of respondents to the survey identified enhanced productivity and decision support as the major impact of AI on the workforce. The results also identified improved productivity and efficiency as the opportunity that was most commonly identified by the respondents. The gaps, though, that I've just talked about, the capability, leadership, and workforce gaps, are, however, preventing organisations from maximising these benefits. This increased productivity, which arises from technology or improved efficiencies, often arises from reduced labour costs. There's been a huge amount of commentary that AI and automation will decimate jobs. Almost every day you read the paper or hear on the news or whatever, somebody new commenting on how jobs are going to be decimated by AI. And I was listening to a podcast this morning. I'm walking over here and getting the same message. However, the survey suggested something else, at least in the short term. Whilst most saw AI transforming jobs, more of the respondents saw a net creation of jobs rather than a net reduction. I wonder whether or not this is a bit optimistic, at least in the medium to longer term. Be interesting to see next year when we resurvey whether or not that more positive sentiment remains. The skills deficit is particularly apparent from the report. It revealed the issues facing organisations, but also the issues facing individuals and policymakers. Perhaps the output from the report which attracted the most publicity related to proposed investment over the next 12 months. 74% of respondents plan to invest more in technology than people. Only 5% said they were going to be investing more in people than technology, despite these capability, leadership, and workforce gaps. And I think another response is revealing. 64% anticipate that they will be in greater need of people with so-called soft skills rather than technical skills, as opposed to only 15% who anticipated the greater need for technical skills over soft skills. And I think this increased focus on these softer skills is probably right. These soft skills are perhaps the uniquely human skills, such as judgment, creativity, collaboration, communication. And to me, individuals and policymakers are going to have to look very carefully at our approaches to education and training. Are we developing the right skills? Has the world of work moved on so quickly that we need to look carefully at the skills that schools are developing? And are universities the right sort of environment in which people to acquire these skills? One thing that I always say to people these days is that when recruiting, if I ever see a candidate who has worked in retail and hospitality, I immediately think that they've had the opportunity to acquire and develop these valuable softer skills in communication, collaboration. Whatever job you're in, even if you're a lawyer like me, you do occasionally have to deal with difficult clients, difficult customers, and I think that that background in a different working environment that enables you to develop these skills becomes even more important these days. And I always recommend to younger people going to get experience in such an environment, whatever they plan doing in the future. Maximising the productivity gains from technology will not only entail developing these people skills to get the most out of technology, but for organisations to invest in workplace culture, so that culture is not a barrier to getting the most out of investments, focusing on generating trust, engagement, and the like. 49% of respondents, pretty much half, expected cultural resistance to slow down the adoption of new technologies and the implementation of new operating models. This cultural resistance can arise from fears about the impact of change on jobs and careers, well, we've always done it this way mentality, or a cumulative change fatigue, or just a failure to consult and communicate effectively with the workforce, particularly in a time where employee voice is becoming more important to many. And another of the survey's outputs was that organisations did see an increase in this bottom-up influence. So to bring all that together, increasing productivity is going to be about people as well as technology. And I think it's clear from the report, and it makes sense to me, that the countries and organisations which get that right should thrive in tomorrow's world of work. So on that, I think I'm going to pass over next to Christian to say something about the drivers of productivity.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. And I mean, these are really interesting survey findings. And yeah, so I mean, I think I'm going to really elaborate a little bit more as well on the basis of that. I mean, as you said, productivity is not only driven by the adoption of the newest technology and capital investment, but it's really the people that are driving a company or an employer to be productive, and people that is about skills, but that's also about the working conditions they are in, the wages that they get, the systems that are in place as well to reward good performance. So this is really key and is actually shaping productivity outcomes really critically. And I think it's always, important to really bear this in mind. And even, when discussing about the technologies and what impacts they are going to have, I think it really depends as well a lot on the people that work with those technologies, that they are equipped with particular skills that is actually needed. And often it's also a combination. So it's not either soft skills alone or technical skills alone. I mean, it's really that. It's really the combination that can make a difference. And particularly when we see this rapid technological change, I think it's important for governments to put policies in place, but also for employers to put guidelines in place and policies at the employer level to make sure that skills can be developed, new skills and adaptable, flexible skill systems are being put in place, because I think this is ultimately what will also define whether AI is going to replace jobs or whether it's actually going to augment jobs and increase our productivity with actually positive effects than associated. Since job profiles, I think, are changing and will be rapidly changing. I think a lot in terms of detail we don't actually know yet. I think this is an area of research that some people are looking into. But it really means that skills profiles need to change, and clearly AI and digitalization is changing the skills requirements. And also an issue that is becoming very important is, I think, the whole area of lifelong learning, because from Asia Pacific perspective, some countries do face demographic transition. Some countries face dramatic aging of the labor force, thinking especially about some of the countries in East Asia, Korea, Japan. And then, this concept of lifelong learning is not only for those countries, but generally is extremely important, so that there is a culture of continuous learning, continuous adaptation, continuous curiosity, and embracing this culture as an employer is really, what generates this ecosystem in which people can be productive and businesses can be successful. So that is really on the skills side, and perhaps to highlight few aspects on the working conditions side, where of course one key factor is wage, but also it's not only that, it's also about safe and healthy working conditions. It's about stable employment relationships, also the capability of employers to actually retain people, to avoid quick turnover, which can actually erode the skill set in the workforce. It's also about worker participation, social dialogue between governments, employers, workers, and their representatives. It's about reasonable working hours. So, I mean, all this really need to fit together in order for a worker to be able to be productive and to really, fully exhaust his or her potential. And in a sense, it can really be a win-win situation, win for the worker, but also then a win for the company. Since, of course, some of potential measures to be put in place, to create that environment, that climate, they will cost money. But I think if you look at the empirical evidence that is out there, this can really pay off. And I think this is very important to bear in mind, especially in these periods of rapid change, rapid transformation in terms of technology, in terms of demographics as well. Back to you, James.
Apologies, I was on mute. I'm now going to say a few words about attracting and retaining the best people. We may well be facing the dilemma as to whether or not the future world of work is a world with too few workers or too few jobs. But whatever, I think that competition is bound to increase for the workers who have the skills that are needed for the jobs of tomorrow. For employers, working to attract and retain the best people will become a more pressing priority. And going back to our survey, one of the key takeaways is that 70% of organizations are placing more emphasis on purpose, belonging, and culture in order to attract and retain the best people. I think those are very, with my managerial responsibilities, I always think about these things. Are we doing more to enhance purpose, people's purpose in their work, belonging, a sense of belonging to their team or to the business, and the culture within the organization? And I think that with changing workforce expectations and tightening labour market expectations, that this is something that people do need to focus on increasingly. Another key takeaway is that more employers are restructuring roles and careers, moving towards flatter, skills-based and more collaborative models. I think this will strengthen long-term adaptability. And even if we have this readiness mirage where there's an increased focus on the short term, I do think there's also an increased focus on adaptability to enable organizations to adapt to the unpredictable, more medium and long-term challenges. One output, which I thought was particularly interesting, is the last point I'm going to make here, is we surveyed the businesses on the barriers that they saw to finding and retaining people with the right skills. And notably, the biggest barrier, with 30% of respondents, was immigration limits or restrictions reducing access to overseas resourcing. That was ahead of gaps in experience or skills amongst applicants. And I think there's a tension here between the politics that we see in many countries where there's an increased hostility to migration, yet the increased realization that migration is necessary to drive growth. And I think we see that in the UK as a prime example with Brexit and the consequences that have flowed from that. And I do wonder whether or not we might see that sort of perception towards migration evolving in time as the benefits become perhaps more visible. So on that, I'm now going to pass over to Annabelle to say something about the main gaps affecting productivity measurement.
Many thanks, James. Yes, we are going to. I'm going to talk now about how we measure productivities and how we should be careful in looking at data and productivity. So when you think about it, productivity conceptually, it's a straightforward idea. It's the volume of output produced from a given quantity of inputs. Okay, so the cleanest way to measure labor productivity is to divide output by the total hours worked to produce it. This seems to be very simple, but in fact, there's a lot of measurement challenges associated with this measure, and I would like to highlight 3 of them today. The first challenge is measuring output. Output is extremely difficult to measure when goods and services are not sold on a market. Think about education, think about healthcare, or content made freely available on the internet. In addition, in sectors undergoing rapid technological changes, it's very difficult to separate genuine increase in output volume from quality improvements, which are often bundled with prices. And this is a persistent problem. Globalization is also an issue. It can distort productivity measure as, for instance, output of multinational companies may be recorded in different locations due to profit shifting for tax optimization. The second challenge is to measure labor inputs. Labor is not homogeneous. Work we conducted at the OECD suggests that education and age, which is a proxy for experience, affect the measurement of labor inputs, while other factors such as gender or the industry of work yield minimal differences. In addition, cross-country comparability adds another layer of difficulties because countries differ in how they measure hours worked. For instance, how they treat overtime. For this reason, we sometimes fall back on a simpler measure of productivity, which is productivity per employee, not per hours worked. But even this is imperfect, particularly in economies where informal labor is widespread, and Christians show a very nice example of that. The third and probably the most pressing issue is regarding intangible assets. So as you know, our economies are increasingly relying on intangibles like software, R&D, branding, organizational capital, and now AI. And so these inputs can significantly boost output, and still they are poorly captured within traditional measurement frameworks. And when intangible value creation goes under-recorded, output appears lower than it actually is. This makes firms look as though they consume resources without producing commensurate results. And this problem is particularly pronounced in finance, healthcare, education, and technological sectors. The issue also distorts how we count labor inputs. When workers invest time in creating intangible assets, for instance, when they write codes that are going to be used for years, those hours are recorded as ordinary labor hours and are not different from hours that are used to that are spent on current production. And so to address these issues, last year in 2025, the updated system of national accounts has moved toward capitalizing a broader set of intangible, including data assets, and has also made space for AI-related intellectual property. So this should help to give us a sharper picture on productivity growth. That said, this is not perfect either, and there's still room for improvement. In particular, on-account assets like software or data are typically valued at production cost, not at their economic value. So most likely those intangibles are going to be undervalued. In addition, even if the coverage has increased, large categories such as organizational capital or management quality still remain outside the production boundary. So in conclusion, we must be careful when interpreting productivity developments. We need measures that are comparable across countries, but we also need to keep in mind the limitations of the measure, in particular for non-market services and regarding the treatment of intangible assets. This is important to get this right if we want to get a proper diagnosis on productivity and to provide useful information for policymaking. Thank you. Back to you, James.
Thank you, Annabelle. So now can I pass over to Fadi, who's going to say something about improving productivity, challenges, legal risks, and mitigation strategies.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much. So the first thing, of course, that will come to my mind when we talk about this particular topic is, of course, how I'm going to improve my organization, how I'm going to maybe use IT tools, going to automatize certain workflows and improve individual performance. So that's the obvious answer to improve productivity. And there's something else I want to talk about is the fact that other factors can also have an impact on productivity. And these are working conditions and the company organization and also the industrial relations. So the first thing that you should do if you want to improve productivity is probably to create an environment that fosters productivity. This may sound obvious, but we see in the files that we have to deal with that sometimes it's not the case. So according to a survey that was conducted by Opinionway, a French polling company, in May 2025, nearly 8 out of 10 employees said they felt professional fatigue, widespread physical and mental exhaustion. So this poll is for France, but I'm sure we can find, similar answers in other jurisdictions. And over the last 6 months, employees reported that 1 in 5 have taken a sick leave that is for work-related reasons, so exhaustion, physical pain, or mental health issues. And more than half of the employees feel that their employer is not taking concrete action to protect their mental health. So what I want to say is a poor working environment will always end up having an impact on the company's performance and therefore create a decline, will create an impact on productivity that can be through absenteeism, to staff turnover, or more generally, it can lead to a decline in engagement. That brings me to my legal point, which is that the employer has the obligation to ensure the health and safety of the employees. That is the case in France, and that will also be the case across pretty much every European jurisdiction, of course, with some nuance. Employers have a clear and enforceable obligation to take all reasonable actions to ensure health, safety, and the welfare of their employees at work. And this will obviously extend to mental health. And judges will look at the way work is organized, at workload, and how targets are set, etc. And this will have an impact on productivity. And that's where the legal aspect can have an impact on productivity. Also, I think that employee expectations are changing rapidly. We also conducted, just like James, that's the previous slide, a survey in June 2025 for our publication, which is called Capstone Perspectives, amongst our clients, and actually 97% of companies reported an increase in employee expectation regarding work-life balance, and 74 observed an increase in demands for autonomy at work. So these expectations, HR and employers have to deal with, obviously, and they are consistent with the changes in the world of work that we observe in many countries. And that will obviously have an impact on the last point I want to raise on this particular topic, which is that the employees need to ensure that the employees find their work meaningful. That's something that is a driver for a lot of employees, and that is something that they will be very careful about. So again, the same survey that was conducted in 2025 by OpinionWay showed that 4 out of 10 employees say they would consider leaving their jobs within the next 2 years for a role that offers greater meaning. So that means we have to re-engage with the workforce and strengthen the employee's sense of purpose at work. Of course, one effective way to do that, and that's something we do in France, but that also exists in other European jurisdictions, although not all the jurisdictions, is to have employee profit sharing schemes, employee share ownership programs. And these actually create a direct relationship with the employee's remuneration and the employees and the business as a whole. And that can improve the sense of being, meaningful and have an impact on the contribution, the contribution being impactful for the work that employees do. So that will allow them to feel genuinely rewarded for the value they create. And then I want to move on to the next topic, which is headcount reduction. And I think we have a slide on this one, and the changes to employment practice. So that's a previous slide. Yeah, previous again. Thank you. Yes. So that's a common situation where you have I would say a conflict between the legal landscape and the search for productivity. Obviously, when you want to have productivity gain, you are going to look at how can I reduce my headcount, having the same workload but less people to do it. So headcount reduction. You would reduce labor costs, but you would not lower the production targets. These kind of operation will almost always have a direct impact on the organization of work. So you would redistribute tasks among the remaining employees. It would also potentially increase the workload. It would also potentially have changes in job descriptions and the targets and changes in the organization as a whole. And like for the previous point, this will raise psychological risk. So that's a topic that's very, very hot in France and also in other countries. The impact on mental health that potential restructuring may have. And employers will have to provide a detailed analysis on the health and safety impact that the proposed organizational change will have. And that will be in the framework of the information and consultation process with the employee representative. It's a very important topic in France. It's one of the topics that are the most complex to deal with when you want to implement a redundancy scenario. And that's also the case in other jurisdictions, although the depth of the analysis will probably vary. Obviously, and the most important point will probably be the workload impact. And that's where you're going to have to demonstrate that people are not going to be overworked by the change you're making. And you're going to say that maybe the workload is going elsewhere, maybe you're reducing certain tasks, and maybe you're automating certain tasks. And that will be the next topic I want to deal with. So That means you need to prepare well in advance to have your productivity gain, to implement them, because that's something you'll be challenged on during in the course of your consultation process. So obviously, at the end of the day, if you do things right, you will probably be able to implement the changes you want to implement. But you have to bear in mind that if later on there's a health and safety risk, a mental health and safety risk, the Works Council will probably be able to raise an alert, and that will be the case in France, for instance, where the Works Council will be able to appoint an expert who can run an independent analysis, maybe with a certain bias, of course, because they are appointed by the Works Council, on the risk of the organization. So that will be always monitored when dealing with this. So and that's something you have to be careful with. Then third point is the return to the office. That's also a point I wanted to tackle with because that's of course a debated topic. Is asking employees to return to the office a nice way to improve productivity, or are employees more productive when they work from home? That's not a topic I have the skill set to give you guidance on, and maybe my colleagues here on the call are better able to answer that particular question. But I do see a trend though. Clients come to us to ask, oh, we want employees to come back to the office because we think it will foster productivity. We think it will create a more productive work environment, improve managerial effectiveness, create team cohesion, etc., etc., etc. So that's a trend that we see a lot amongst our clients, and actually same when the polls that we asked and the question that we asked for our book, Capstone Perspectives, in June of 2025, 20% of companies considered that refining the hybrid model work will be a major HR challenge in the coming years. And I think that if we were to ask a question today, almost a year later, I'm sure that this number is probably going to be much, much, much higher. And at the same time, 28% of employees would like to telework more. And that's, of course, a big ask. And I'm sure many of the participants on this call participated in job interviews, and that's a question you get. Will I be able to work from home? And what's a balance between going to the office and working from home? So the problem that we face is that we see strong resistance from employees about having to return to the office more often. They've organized their work-life balance, their personal life on working from home, and they tell us, well, on Wednesdays I have to pick up my kids and bring them to their activities, so I cannot do this. I cannot work from the office on Wednesdays, for instance. So in most cases, employees will not be able to oppose return to the office because work from home arrangements are not part of the employment contract, but they are a company policy. But there's still a need for a consultation process and a reasonable notice. The thing is that even in the least unionized employees situation, and I have clients in the tech industry, for instance, where unions are not very strong usually, this is something that will mobilize the workforce, and we see we even see strikes on these topics amongst white collars, which is not very common. So we see strong resistance from the Works Council, from the unions, and from employees themselves. So that's something you need to prepare well in advance to ensure that the decision is not perceived as arbitrary, and also to ensure, of course, that the changes are legally compliant. And that brings me to my fourth and last point on this particular topic, which is introduction of new technology. That's going to be the next slide. And that's something, honestly, it's been in labor code. I'm going to speak for France. It's been in labor code for a long time. And that's not something that we had a lot of dealing with. But of course, now with AI, it's something that we see a lot. And 70% of executives of companies, and that's also a question we ask in the framework of our book, Capstone Perspective, consider themselves to be behind or only partially advanced in integrating AI. So that's something that a lot of us feel that they need to work on. And the thing is that, well, you want to work on this, and that's great, but then you also have an obligation to consult with the Works Council prior to the introduction of new technology. And obviously, AI is a new technology. It will improve productivity, but it's also a new technology. So the problem that we see here is that the pace is not the same. Once you want to consult the Works Council, it's going to take you 1-2 months. And some may say that in 2 months, the AI world would have made progress. And you see that in every 6 months, the thing that we thought were cutting edge technology are becoming obsolete. So we have, a pace problem here, and that may impede your ability to be agile and to implement the changes of AI as fast as you want to implement them. So that's also a topic that you need to work on in advance. And back to you, James, for next item.
I just want to say quickly that I was particularly interested in what you had to say about mental health being an increasing issue. In the UK, we have what we call NEETs. That's people not in employment, education, or training. And they are there's a lot of attention to the high numbers of people who are economically inactive and whose skills are therefore not being utilised to grow the economy. Those economically inactive people comprise carers, students, prematurely retired people, people who retired before the age of 65, but also the long-term ill. The long-term ill, the numbers are growing. I don't know if it's the case in other countries, but are growing very quickly in the UK. And it's growing because it's mental health that's increasing these numbers, and it's young people. And there's a really big political issue in the UK with different people with different theories as to how we can drive economic growth through reducing the number of people on long-term sick leave, particularly younger people with mental health issues. In the news this morning, there was a report I just noticed where there'd been a survey of our doctors, our GPs, and the significant majority of them said they have never refused to sign off somebody who's come in with mental health issues. So it's a big issue in the UK. But anyway, having said that, I'm going to go now to Christian, who's going to say something about working time regulation and productivity outcomes.
Yeah, thank you so much, James, and also interesting to hear about those earlier survey results presented. So in terms of working time regulation, I think working time is certainly an absolute key aspect of the whole area of working conditions. So at our organization, International Labour Organization, really actually since the very beginning, this has been a core topic discussed among our constituents, which are the governments, employers, and workers of our member states. And even the very first ILO convention adopted in 1919 dealt with that issue, essentially introducing the 48 hours week at the time with 8 hours a day. And there are a variety of further ILO conventions dealing with that issue with a number of hours, but for example, also with minimum weekly rest periods and so forth and so on. So this is really, there's a long history to it, which really also shows actually the importance of this aspect in terms of job quality. And when we talk about working time, I think it's really two aspects. So it's on the one hand the number of hours worked, but it's not only that. It's indeed how those working hours are organized, whether they are flexibly organized or whether they are very rigid, whether there is, let's say, at any time some unexpected work can come up, which can have actually negative impacts on worker well-being, or whether there are periods of true breaks. So this does really matter. And perhaps starting with the number of hours worked, I think generally there is perhaps some change in attitudes, but still what is out there is this belief that long working hours somehow automatically result in higher productivity. But that's actually really a myth. And in fact, there is by now actually a lot of empirical evidence out there that actually shows that longer hours of work are generally associated actually with lower productivity per hour. And shorter hours of work are generally linked with higher productivity per hour. And I mean, this also relates to job satisfaction, motivation. There is some empirical studies out there that show that heavy workloads report decreasing job satisfaction, decreasing motivation, higher rates of absenteeism, higher rates of staff turnovers, also long hours. Countries with long hours of work often tend to have relatively low productivity per unit of labor. And yeah, so there is really a lot of evidence out there on the number of working hours, but then when it comes to the organization of working hours, and life balance and policies that promote better work-life balance, I don't think it's very surprising that studies do show actually clear evidence in terms of employee retention among companies that facilitate that work-life balance. There is findings of improved recruitment. Again, also reduced absenteeism. When we look at companies with rather flexible schedules. Also, there are studies out there that look at how employees at least perceive their focus, concentration on the work, and their numbers are better actually for those employees that can enjoy more flexible work arrangements. So there is really, I think, a lot that can be done by companies, and which in the end, again, it can be a win-win. Win in terms of gains for the workers, in terms of worker welfare, in terms of better working life balance, in terms of a higher degree of job satisfaction, and way to be fulfilled by the work that you're doing. And on the other hand, there can be quite substantial productivity gains as well by adopting, these more flexible type of policies. So this would be from the ILO perspective, how we would see that, and also the evidence produced so far. And actually, for those that have more interest in that, just a few years back, I think 2023 or 2022, actually, we came out with a report that talks about this, that looks into this, and summarizes as well all the evidence that is out there.
Christian, so now back to Fadi to say a few words about regulation and productivity.
Thank you, James. So on this particular topic, likewise, when we talk about productivity and regulation, when we talk about productivity in workplace, the reflex and my reflex would be more like I want more hours, more flexible working time, etc. More. Although you would argue that more hours is not exactly productivity, but it's increasing the workload, but not increasing the productivity per hour. And obviously, you can do anything you want because there are regulations. So first of all, when I prepared for this webinar, I read a Le Monde article from earlier this week that talked about startups saying it's a great idea to have the 996 model, and apparently it's from the Silicon Valley. Never heard of it, to be honest. Maybe I'm a bit dumb, but I never heard of it before. And they advocate for this model, and it's a model where you work 6 days a week, so Monday to Saturday, that's six, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And apparently they think it's great. The idea is to extend the amount of working time employees spend at work to increase the volume of production. So I'll give you a scoop, that's not legal in France, and that's not legal in the EU as a whole, because the EU regulation prohibits working more than 48 hours a week. And they also say that you need to get 11 hours rest per day, and you need to get 24 hours rest per week on top of those 11 hours. So that's a 35 hours weekend at least. And also there's a compulsory resting time when you work more than 6 hours per day. So obviously this model doesn't work, and the mere fact that they advertise and advocate for it publicly raises questions. And I think that the labor inspector that's competent for this particular business will be happy to read the newspaper. And then, like I said, you could say that the objective here is not to improve productivity, but to increase the volume of production. And I'm not sure you are very productive when you work 72 hours per week. I'm not sure those 72 hours are very productive. So that's on working time regulation that will prevent you from doing whatever you want on working time. And also, I've tackled with this a little bit in my prior intervention. It's about consultation processes. There is a comprehensive consultation process in a lot of jurisdictions. It's obviously in France where you're going to find probably the most complex one and where you're going to have to consult the most of the times. So most of the times there's a prior consultation requirement, and that means that certain decisions must be submitted to the Works Council, and a consultation period must be observed, and employees' representatives may request additional information. This can take up to 2 months. And that can be, for instance, for new tools, team reorganization, change to working hours, and development of remote working. That these topics can require prior consultation. This may be seen as a time constraints, but actually, this will also help you anticipate the effect of the transformation you're contemplating on the working condition. It will force you to prepare well in advance for your project. I've also tackled with dismissals in my previous interventions. Obviously, the company might determine that an employee is not productive enough and consider that the employee should be dismissed. So you may also consider a redundancy plan. So these are two different scenarios. You have the poor work performance scenario and the redundancy scenario. But of course, to be able to implement them, you have a certain number of requirements you need to meet. So the best example is for a poor work performance case, you will need to implement a performance improvement plan. So if you feel that the employee is not performer, so he's not productive enough, you will need to prepare the case to be able to dismiss him. And that will obviously take time. And this time, during this period of time, the employee will remain within the business. So delivering change within the business will take time, and the employees will also enjoy a certain level of protection. And that's also something that has to deal with mental health, a topic I covered earlier on. So I actually on this, I cannot emphasize enough how this topic is important. When you look at 20, 25 years ago, it wasn't, at least not in France. And it's now in the heart of every project, and you have to have a look at workload, and courts will monitor this very carefully. You also have to have a look at the right to disconnect, and that's something that I think that's peculiar to France, very specific to France. And I know that my foreign clients are very interested in this topic because it's a bit weird from a foreign ear. And also, they will also have a look at situation of burnout or organizational overload. And there may be also criminal sanctions involved in the most extreme cases for all this topic. So that's something you want to work on before. And I'll stop there to leave time for questions, James.
Thank you, Fadi. Before questions, I've just got one more slide I was going to talk to, which summarizes, I think it actually summarizes very well both what we've all been saying today, and it also reflects the conclusions of the survey I've talked to, because that survey shows 6 key takeaways for policymakers and employers, which you can see on that screen. We've talked these in some depth, but we can see AI is a productivity driver with the people risk. And again, I think reinforcing that in the introduction of technology in order to drive productivity gains must be coupled with investment in people to enable organizations to get the best out of that technology. The rising capability gaps, which I talked about earlier, regulatory and planning friction. And one thing that always strikes me when talking to clients and clients that are looking to invest in the UK or other countries is it's often not the extent of the regulation, it's the consistency and predictability. Employer clients say to me, look, we can manage if we know what the rules are going to be. What we can't cope with is when the rules are changing all the time and we don't know what the rules are going to be. So regulatory consistency is critical in driving growth. Attracting and retaining the right people, we covered that. Purpose, belonging, culture, and as Fadi mentioned, autonomy. Focus on those things and you will do well in attracting and retaining the right people. Working time and productivity, we've address that and the importance of controlling working time in order to achieve maximum productivity, and also the challenges with measurement gaps. So, yeah, those are the 6 takeaways that I think both reflect what we have been talking about today and also reflect the conclusions from the survey that I referred to earlier. I think that's now time for questions. I don't know if we have any questions.
Thank you, James. Yes, indeed, we have several questions from the attendees. The first one is for France, for you, Fadi. Working from home is not a contractual but a policy matter. What if the place of work is contractually stipulated as the employee's home?
In that case, it's part of the employment contract and you cannot change it without the employee consent. Most of the time, that's the exception, though. Most of the time, the policy is for hybrid working models. So in the employment contract, it says you need to work from the office, and then there's a policy that was implemented that says you can work from home 2 days, 3 days a week, or whatever. But we do have cases where the stipulated working place in the employment contract is home, and in that case, you need consent.
Thank you very much. We have a question for Annabelle. You touched on population aging as one of the factors weighing on productivity. Can you say a bit more about what the evidence actually tells us there?
Thank you for this question. I think it's quite an important one indeed, and it's a question where, in fact, you can see differences between what the standard narrative suggests and what the evidence really shows. The conventional concern is that when population age, the workforce is going to shift toward older workers and who may be, on average, less productive than younger workers. But the empirical evidence on this is considerably more complex. At the individual level, there's no evidence that supports simply this story of decline. It's true that older workers tend to have lower levels on certain cognitive abilities, but they also compensate with accumulated experience. So the net effect on productivity is going to be task dependent and will vary across occupations. At the firm level, there is some evidence that when you have a more diverse age workforce, it performs better than an homogeneous one. And this suggests that you have some complementarity between younger and older workers. And finally, at the macro level, the picture is really hard to read. There are several studies that find that there is a negative association between aging and productivity growth, but the effect is really modest and it's sensitive to how you control for other factors. And there's one further complication is that when you have aging, sometimes it induces productivity enhancements. And one example that is often quoted there is Japan, where you had a population aging that was quite severe and that has accelerating robotization. So the bottom line is, yes, aging is likely to be a headwind for productivity, but probably not a dominant one. And it's going to interact with a lot of policy choices that are going to also have an effect on the demographic and on the impact on productivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. We have a question for Christian. How does the International Labour Organization support countries to have more productive workplaces?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. So I think as background, it's important to understand that we as ILO, we are somehow a special UN agency in the sense that our member states are represented by governments, employers, and worker representatives. So it is really, these 3 parties actually coming together and deciding about labor standards. And we have once a year the National Labor Conference and so forth and so on. And of course, it is really in the DNA of our organization that we promote this social dialogue between governments, employers, and workers This is really the approach that we take towards all our, let's say, interventions or all the technical support that we are providing to countries globally, but also here in the Asia Pacific region. So just as an example, we are supporting countries in the development of national employment policies, where we bring different stakeholders together. So we are very often asked by governments to actually take a facilitator role. And of course, in these consultations to develop the policy, there would be governments represented, various ministries, as well as employer organizations and worker organizations. And it's really this combination that often results in effective and sustainable measures, also to foster productivity and to create productive workplaces, because it is very important to really have everyone on board, and then these policies, of course, then will be implemented, and then this trickles down as well, from the country level or the province level. We also have provincial employment policies to the actual employers or companies. So this is one area, and then just very briefly, another area. So we have a whole section actually that works to support enterprises specifically. And there we encourage countries, in fact, to have systems in place that allow basically promote the establishment of enterprises, because very often the business ideas are there, but then the know-how, how to really set up a business, how to develop a business, how to make sure that the business is sustainable. This is often the challenge, and there are some good practices out there that actually look at this and support enterprises in becoming productive.
Thank you very much, Christian. And we have time for a last question for James. How do you think productivity may be affected by hybrid working?
I'm a big advocate of hybrid working. I think that I would say three things about it. We're talking about hybrid working and not remote working. Hybrid working involves spending some time in the office, in the workplace, working with your colleagues, because collaboration and teamwork is important, and it's very difficult to drive this if you're not working at all with your colleagues. And I do understand that training and developing people do learn by osmosis, and being with your colleagues is important to that. Though, as the workplace has changed, when I started out as a lawyer, we had two people in a room, and the more junior person could sit and listen to what the more senior person was saying and could develop. Now it's all open plan, headphones, and I think it's a little bit overplayed in many workplaces, this learning through osmosis. And I think concerns about productivity often demonstrate a poor culture and a lack of trust. If you have what it is management saying, well, if I'm not there looking over the shoulder of the employees, how do I know that they're working hard? And I think if you've got the right culture, you have the trust, you'll get that commitment. The other thing, perhaps the most important thing, is particularly in those areas where you have in-demand skills. We've talked at some length today already about attracting and retaining the best people. People value flexibility. They value this very highly in choosing who to work for. And I am partly influenced by the number of employer clients that have phoned me over the years saying, James, management has required everybody to be in the office 5 days a week. But we've got all these really key people that are resigning to go and work somewhere else where they can have a degree of flexibility. How can we stop them? I think, well, if you really want to pay me to tell you the answer to that, then there's a problem here, because you've got to adapt to what people want. If you've got people who value very highly working flexibly, if you don't deliver it, they'll go and work for a competitor who is able to provide it. And I think that's increasingly so when the maximising financial reward is less of the key drivers, particularly in professional services and financial services. I did this. So, it's not always popular, but for me, it's sort of grow up and adapt. Hybrid working is here to stay. And if you do it properly, you can thrive.
Thank you very much, James. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time to take all of your questions now. For any further question that you might have, our lawyers will remain available via email. I would also like to bring your attention to our new AI-based platform, Delphius, answering in a quick and concise way to queries on employment law. If you will be interested in receiving a demo and join a 30-day trial period, please do not hesitate to scan this QR code that you have on the slide to book a demo with us. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and thank you also to our guests from OECD and ILO, and our lawyer from UK and France for their very interesting insight today. With that, the webinar will now be ending. Thank you very much and have a great rest of the day.